Good morning, everybody. Before you start, I would like to know if everybody can hear me. If you can hear me, please use the chat and confirm that you do. Okay, great. So first of all, I'm so sorry for the delay. We had some connection problems, but great. If you have any problems with the audio or any other problems with the platform, you can refresh the page or just write the text. Dennis, you can use the question mark that is on the bottom left. My name is Sebastian Rodriguez from the United Nations Environment Programs, and I'm going to start with this webinar. First, I would like to give you some technical issues related to the voice boxer platform that we're using. The presentation you will listen into English and Spanish with translation depending on your preference. You can click on the bottom of the screen. You can choose your language. Second, I would like to welcome you to this webinar and the support the National Adaptation Plans for Climate Change, and that we do it with the Spanish commercial agencies and the Climate Technology Center and Networks and the Pnacc GSP. And the community it has an objective to support public servers and who are interested with the adaptation and climate change in the Latin American region and Latin America. And thank you for participating in this. As you will know, our webinar today is about financial mechanisms, basic ingredients to ensure the sustainability of adaptation in the long and medium term. And to give you some context about the webinar structure, we have the pleasure of welcome two experts for plans related to adaptations. It's important to mention that after these two presentations, we will have a Q&A session. That's why I will thank if you could wait until we have that session. Please feel free to write your questions through the presentations in the chat. As a brief introduction, the process is to present national plans, and it represents a unique opportunity to strengthen the resilience of communities and their ecosystems. It's important for the sustainability and the adaptation plans to have financial mechanisms to ensure the continuity of process in the medium and long term. With this webinar, we try to answer questions to what is the importance of developing financial mechanisms to ensure the sustainability of adaptations, what are the success factors and the challenges to implement this, and what examples do we have in Latin America and the Caribbean. For this, we have invited two presenters. On one side, we have Malky Science, coordinator of the University of Simon Bolivar, Ecuador, and the Mark Charles for Sustainable Development in Latin America. On one end, Malky Science has 20 years of experience managing public policies and environmental plans designed for projects and institutions and mapping of the geographical areas. He also has ecology studies, public policies, environmental policies, and sociology, and experiences in projects and institutions. He also has experience managing databases, particularly to systematize and monitor processes. While he was a technical secretary to the YK Pnacc, and currently works as the coordinator of the environmental innovation of the Universidad Andina Simón Bolívar. On the other hand, the Untitled Chapter has a PhD in Political Sciences of the Polytechnical University of Madrid. Luis was at Pnacc and managing national parks and the forest department between 1999 and 2006. And he also worked as a native forest director until March 2018. He has experience in national and international consultancy related to forest management, and some of his work And our one of these important clients was to design and coordinate the action plans to create the first national plan to restore native forests in Argentina 2017 and 2018, and design and create good practice manuals also to manage a native forest and a plant forest for the Patagonia region of that country. With any further ado, it's a pleasure to give the word to Malky to his presentations. That is financing mechanisms for water preservation. Go on, Malky. Good morning. I hope you can hear me well. I have some connection problems, internet connection problems. So I hope the signal that doesn't go down, I hope you can hear me. I will try to do a brief presentation related to the water fund for Quito. And with that, I will start my presentation. I hope you can hear me. Okay, well, thank you very much for the introduction. What I would like to show you is the financing mechanism for water conservation. And a practical example that we had in Ecuador, to be more specific, in the city of Quito. And I have 15 or 16 years of this is working. This is working since 2001, and basically what I want to show you is what has happened and why this particular case occurred in the country. The first thing that I would like to tell you is that obviously all starts due to the problems that we had or still have in the city and how to face these problems. So look at the search for new water sources, more distance and expensive for a city that was in high growth like Quito. Now we have 3 million inhabitants, but in 2000 probably were talking about just only 1 million, so it has a very high growth rate. How to get water or where to get water for such much people? That was the main question. There were two ways to do it. We could go and try to find water in a more distant place, or try to do some type of conservation in order to somehow make sure that the water sources that provide water could be used. There is accelerated deterioration of these sources in those places due to the change in land use. In the picture you can see represents really well of what's going on in these places. The places where we have the water catchment become deteriorated, the soil becomes more compact, the vegetation is removed, so we can have a different type of use, and we don't have the same water resource. There is an urban ignorance about water resources. We actually spoil it. There are information gaps for technical, social, and institutional management to use these natural resources, and some voice of national and local regulations for water management, which is very relevant because we don't have instruments to manage in the best way the water resource locally. So look at all these problems in 2000. Now to face these problems is that we proposed to create this water fund. And now I'm showing you the Quito map and the basin where the water comes to Quito. It is interesting to know that with the growth that Quito is experiencing, obviously the demand level is extremely high. We're talking about probably a basin of 541 hectares of 2,800,000 inhabitants. Well, that is growing, and an altitude between 1,000 and 4,000 meters above the sea level. But the water is produced between 3,500 or 3,600 meters. So taking this as an example, the idea is to get these 4 keywords that are what we need to interpret when we create this water fund. We have a resource that is the water. We have a specific place that has this need, and it's a city, in this case it's Quito. we have sources that have to be protected. Otherwise, the other mechanisms will be to get water from another place with an extremely costly structure and with some capex and in order to have the water back. I will continue with audio only. Therefore, this long-term solution that could be comprehensive, efficient, and complementary gives or starts the water fund. The idea is to implement an agile and stable finance system for water management for the city. And this means that we need to have enough money to create conservation processes that are efficient. So we need to keep a system that allows you to acquire funds that you could use fast, but in the long term as well. This could be sustainable in the long term. We need to define a technical and specialized scheme to address the different aspects of water management. That is the provision, the treatment, the management of droughts and floods, etc. All this is comprehensive and need to be specialized to manage the water resource. We need to promote a decision-making scheme based on public management and environmental priorities. And of course, generate the public-private management spaces coupled to a local urban agenda. We need to couple this to this conservation process. So water fund is not just to how can we preserve these water sources. No, it means at the same time many other things. And that's what we want to present to you in the next slide. So if we put in an equation the water fund, so what would this mean? So if you look at the first equation, what I'm saying is that the water funds are a financial mechanism that is the way to find resources that are sustainable in time, and institutional mechanisms that is the way how the fund operates and the way we take this fund. Maybe we have a board and a technical mechanism. That means how are we going to do this preservation, this research, and how we're going to manage this water resource. Obviously thinking about what it means for each one of the cities we live in. And all this above two bases. One is knowing the reality of that particular city or region, and also knowing really well the legal reality of that place. What are we allowed to do, what we are not allowed to do. And at the same time, we need to know that what we need to find is a niche. What nobody is doing that we can do. If a water fund starts competing with other institutions that already exist, most likely it will fail. And the second equation is very similar to the first, but a little bit more in detail. The first is the financial mechanism, that is to have money and ensure it's a good business. Not trust fund or many other type of financial arrangement, but it has to be a good business. We cannot work for a loss. The second is national mechanisms to have a board that is efficient and that makes fast decisions. And the third is the use of the technical management. We need to have a very well-established technique, a diversity of options to work with the water sources, to be very steady and try to have an impact, of course. And that this over the base of having a good reading about reality, talking about in the political aspect, institutional aspect, the legal aspect, economical, environmental aspects. Two water funds are never the same. So you cannot propose a water fund or the same water fund for two different cities. And finally, the niche, that is what I was saying, is what no one does. We need to go to where nobody does it. So we need to complementary, be the pioneers and outstanding. But we should not compete with the private or public institutions on the things that they are doing, and they're probably doing better than us. What isn't a water fund? The first is to work at a loss. The second is to have a board or ungovernable body, and probably to have a technical use that is dispersed, no impact, or that it's static. If we are trusting just in the myths, or we want to or reproduce one waterfront from one place to another, most likely we are not going to understand what is the reality of that particular place, and then we will not have the impact that we want to have. We will not be able to have a social, political, institutional vision that we want. And finally, trying to do more of the same and not reading the niche correctly means that we are repeating things, we are competing, and most likely we will be very dispersed. In the case of the Quito Water Fund, and I was technical secretary there for 3 years, I had this behavior. We have the Board of Trust that was taking care of this financial mechanisms. The technical mechanisms would classify its options from the amount that they had in what is communication, to have a water management, for environmental educations. We had on the ground a whole conservation actions deployment, and of course having a technical committee that would do a follow-up to everything that was occurring. I am about to finish my presentation, but I would like to tell you that obviously the financial mechanism is extremely important, and we need to think about it with you don't need to think about it with a huge patrimony or assets. Now the Pnacc most likely has for the 2018 at $16 million. And in this case, we would not spend the money that was coming from the different contributors in this fund, but we would just live from the royalties and the complementary projects, and this would allow us to have about $2 million, $3 million a year to work in all these conservation issues that I mentioned a moment ago. And we need to have long-term solutions. They need to be comprehensive. It needs to maintain integrated water information systems. What we do is we monitor the areas of great water interest. We need to recover the areas of interest. We need to bet on education as a tool for change, and it's to promote institutional alliances to strengthen the whole mechanism. That's the only way we believe and we believe we've been successful to keep these water sources for the long term for the whole city. In Ecuador, we have like 7 water funds. Some work well, some don't, and this depends on how they were implemented. I'm not going to read this slide, but it is to tell you all the actions that take place to preserve water in Quito. And how all the interventions that I talked about a moment ago work. And finally, as conclusions and recommendations, I would like to give you at least 6 elements that I believe are fundamental when you propose a water fund. First, you need to define a priority scheme based on the main objective. What we want is to conserve water, and the look is set at 20 years, and no more. We need to try to do many other conservation actions probably other institutions are doing. Ours is water and conservation. We need to diversify the activities both in the strategies and executors. And that means that it's not just one activity. We need to be very diverse when executing the conservation strategies and the financial strategies. We need to adopt a monitoring and permanent impact evaluation role. We live from a public donor, that is the one who gives most of the money, and it's the drinking water of a public company, but we also have financing from the private sector, from water bottlers, from the brewers, and they need to know that there is a permanent impact related to the work we do. We need to find a counterpart that enables the process of sustainability, particularly in the institutional part. That means to work hand in hand and with the local government's agenda. We need to work with the national public entities or other strategic partners, to be public or private. As I said, there are no two equal funds. You cannot translate the Quito scheme to another way 100%. You need to work and what is illegal in the regulations in each one of the countries that you work with a water fund, and you do not try to do everything, as I said at the beginning. For us, it's water and conservation, and no more. Anything that is around that, okay, welcome. What it is not part of that, it's probably a part of what other institution does or takes care of. I believe there are many other questions related to this water fund. Obviously, I cannot reply to all of them, but maybe in the Q&A I could answer some of these. And that will be all from my end. Thank you. Malky, thank you very much for your presentation. It was quite interesting to know that this case related to the Quito Water Fund. And it's particularly important to know the context of the landscape, of the social economic context, to have relevant activities and guarantee that is effective financially and environmentally speaking. And now I'll give the floor to Luis. With his presentation. And his presentation about the National Plan for Forest Restoration in Argentina. Please, Liz. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me to participate in these forums, and a big hug to all participants. Within the webinar initiatives to support the national plans for climate change, I'll do a summary of the process that took place in Argentina in last year, 2017, that is still in the design and implementation stage. And before this, I'm going to introduce or present the framework that we have. Argentina in the past years, a few years ago, had looked at environmental public policies to strengthen the design and implement technical guidance to work on environmental matters. Among these, one of the examples is the commitment of the country to face climate change and the goals we have established to 2030 to reduce greenhouse gases. And within this framework is that last year, the work from the Forest Direction did that was born, and this is the National Plan for Forest Restoration, of the natural degraded forest restoration. And this program is linked with the objective that were established in the public document that will be approved in the in Argentina, and that is the National Strategy for Forest and Climate Change. But what is important is that among the three components for gas emissions is energy, transportation, and forest. And we have defined that the goals to reduce emissions will be reached through the forest component. That's why this forest document, it's important to give a scenario for the National Plan for Forest Restoration. So what is the mission of this public policy? Is that in 2030 Argentina will be managing in a sustainable manner its forests. We will have decreases substantially the restoration and degradation of forests. We will have recovered and rehabilitated ecosystems, and this all would allow on one hand to decrease the vulnerability and improve the adaptation of forests to the climate change effects and decrease the greenhouse gases, all within the framework that I just mentioned. And so what mission and objectives does the program of this National Restoration Plan have? Well, the objective, of course, what motivates the mission, what motivates us, is to restore the degraded forests, always with a high component, always looking at development, the social component, and to help communities to develop and face climate change. What we want to do with this program is to create a national platform that would allow us to not just create a baseline, but at the same time to have a record of all the initiatives, public or private, that are taking place in the country. There are several independent, and so we can have a framework of how this forest restoration process goes and the carbon capture. What the program pretends is that through this national base is to orient and optimize the allocation of human, material, and monetary resources. We want to have external funds, and so this and strengthen all of these initiatives. We need to have an impact at landscape level, at a basin level, and of course this will help to achieve the established goals. The end beneficiary of these whole restoration programs are the communities, and we want to promote their development. Okay, the objective is to promote and guide ecological restoration, recovery, and rehabilitation of native forests under these three components. One is the socio-economical components. The other one is to recover the biodiversity and the forest biodiversity, to produce services, and of course to recover the lost forest biomass. All of this within a climate change scenario. Well, I just realized that the word, it says definitions. I will talk about the methodology that we have established for this program. I mean, we did it through these topic layers. We have identified the priority areas as priority forests that was at basin level. We always had this prioritization. We want to have an analysis of the social economical analysis of where these degraded forests were and what were their function. Once that we had identified this at national level, we have or what we achieved is the two priority areas in the country, and for this first stage of the program we have defined 6 priority areas due to different factors or degradation. The way that we could lower the scale was through strategic alliance mechanisms with intermediate organisms or second-level organisms. Could be universities, NGOs, foundations, institutions. Through their input or these alliances, these organisms will lower the work scale along with the provinces. We have 24 provinces, so we go to the province levels and we improve the focus and define the priority areas. Once we have defined them, then these organizations along with the provinces present what we call the definite maps, where we have the priority areas that need to be supported by this program. And I just want to show you a few examples of the 6 areas that we have as priority in the Estela Bananense, Estela Misionero, that we share with Paraguay and Brazil. And these are the types of maps that they gave us, and as you can see is that we have some parameters of what are the areas that are required to be recovered, and based on the value that is forest have, that they need to be restored. And in this case it was the corridor of a feline that is an endangered species. We define certain priorities, maximum, medium, or low. And that was the case of in the northeast of Argentina. And here we have the 6 nucleus, and will be the main stakeholders or the strategic alliances that we need to work with to create a more detailed map along with the provinces. Here what we have are these 6 areas. One is border with Paraguay and Brazil, and it was just to show you. In this case, we have the yungas, the wet forest, that is number 1. And in this case, we have the yunga forest and Parque Chaqueño. We also share it with Paraguay. And now, regarding the restoration techniques, last year we started to define some pilot areas. We have installed 8 pilot areas, and these areas pretend to provide information, environmental information, and these areas will be followed after the years. And the idea is to replicate these techniques in the priority areas that will be established according to the need of knowledge. The support that the plan will support the creation of these pilot areas around the country. Related to the implementation mechanism for funding, Argentina has a minimum budget of preservation for forest preservation, and that law has a fund that it's aimed for forest, that is protection and sustainable management of the forest. So we allocate funds. It has 2 components. One is managed directly by the Ministry of Environment, and the other one that is a transfer for the local authorities or provincial authorities. In this case, the provincial forest directions. And this program has us allocated through this national budget law $1.5 million, and 2 that should be assigned in 2018 for restoration projects. And it established through the provinces, through these intermediate actors and priority areas, about $5 million a year for the restoration projects that are established by the province. And it's a case established at the priority areas, so you can put a lot of resources in an area at basin level and have some regional impact and, of course, social impact as well. And what we have is the forest law, and what we pretend is to have a fund to capture funds from companies, for corporations, have the funds for financing, for technical and science. And the idea is now that we have a national platform for the priority areas. This program will help us to recover what was lost in that basin. And finally, what we try to do is try to capture international funds. What the program currently has is has an agreement with the World Bank, and what we pretend with this funds from the World Bank is to consolidate this program, to implement it, and continue to 2020 with this financing from the World Bank. And there we will have about $15 million to apply until 2020 to this restoration program. And through this program, what we want to do is to have some international funds that could be allocated to the program, to the same program. Very well. The action plans, we have established goals to the 2023. It's just about policies in the country, and that is between 2017 and 2018. We are designing the final product. We already have an action plan that it's important what are what is happening is the restoration part is taking place right now in April 12th to be applied in the 10 provinces of the country. The idea is to cover the whole country. And now that we have the priority areas that are preliminary, we will have to update it and guide or assign the funds through these programs and give and invite even public or private entities that could support the program. Another element that we want to do through this project is to define the monitoring, design this monitoring. All projects need to be at least 3 years with the monitoring technique well established. And the idea is that all this goes to a systems. We have a national monitoring systems and it has the loss of coverage a year in the country. And the idea is to incorporate a national systems to monitor the degraded forests and incorporate those forests that are in the restoration process. All this would allow us currently to update the goals and at the same time to calculate and recalculate emissions through the results that we are obtaining. Well, this was like a summary of this restoration program. We can give you our contact through Sebastian and webinar if you want to have any information through this program, and you can request it. And of course, the program is just a promise, and it will depend every year to strengthen it. And well, thank you very much for listening. Hi, Luis. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was an excellent presentation. Now we can formally start with the Q&A session. So I invite the participants who have any questions to please write them in the chat. And please also write who this question is for, and we can answer them in English or Spanish. So since for the moment nobody has written any questions, I would like to ask Pnacc a little bit about his experience when establishing these public-private partnerships for the water fund in Quito, and then the diversification of the financing schemes that you mentioned. So Pnacc, I will give you the floor. Thank you very much. There are a couple of things in your question. First, the niche that you find for institutions that could finance a water fund had to be around the water use. In the case of a public company, it is easy to acknowledge the fact that they need to provide drinking water to a city. That's the case of Ecuador, not necessarily the case for other countries. Water in Ecuador could not be privatized or its distribution. That corresponds to the public sector. And so our largest contributor by far is the Metropolitan Public Water Company, that it's the Quito. There are some decentralization levels for water. But for the private case, it would be quite interesting because the relation that you could have to capture those funds, it's a twist in the business. That is to make sure the private company, they needs to understand that their business is to provide water, and that the lack of water will mean to increase cost, at least in related to the business that they provide. It is important to talk with the private companies related to the social and environmental responsibility, but you will not get that far You need to think about what is your business and to convince an institution that if there is no water, then their business will be useless. Therefore, a bottling company or a brewer or those who use water for the textile industry need to realize that the water is their potential, and that's what Pnacc did when they talked about that some of the partners should be from their private sectors. They don't provide as much financing as the public sector, but at the end they kind of allow you to have some different financing options. And thank you very much, Malky, for your questions. Now I would like to ask Luis about how you articulated this restoration plan with the national policies or regional policies, climate change policies, national, regional, or by area that exist in the country, and if there is any coordination system among these policies and the plan. So you have the floor, Luis. Thank you, Sebastian. Of course, under this restoration program occurs because the national policy was established. It started as a public policy guideline with the decision to face climate change, and now with the document, and as we mentioned, that the national forest strategy and climate change, we will define a public policy. Argentina is a complex country because it's a federal and the autonomy of the provinces is quite strong. So the key is that if you want to be successful in restoring the native forest, you need to go through the provinces and ensure that the provinces also get in line with the provincial policies. And that's what's happening now. At the first step, obviously, in the case of the restoration process, is to create together what are the priority areas and allocate resources, national or province resources to develop specific communities. That's when to define the social economical basis, and that's why that's so important. Actually, the provinces are following the nation. The nation, a few years ago, now started having very strong environmental public policies. And it's going to put out to test the national plans because, as I said, its success will depend, as I said, that those jurisdictions that have the dominion of the forest resources act consequently. Perfect, please. Thank you very much. I see one question from Lorena. It says, I would like to know if anybody can give me an example of how you contribute to the sustainability of the financial mechanisms, since many callings for adaptation or mitigation callings showed that this financial mechanism needs to be sustainable. So Luis or Malky, I don't know, who would like to give to have the floor to answer this question? Or Lorena, maybe you can specify this question, if this question has an owner. Okay, I'll give the floor to Malky. First, thank you for your question, Lorena. I think it's quite interesting and it's crucial related to conservation. We cannot talk about the projects that end in 2 years and then there is no financial solution to continue with a longer process. In the case of Pnacc, there are a couple of things that were key. One is that somehow the policies or the legality of these policies and the financing went hand by hand. One was to request through a local law that the water company needed to give a mandatory monthly input over the 2% of what is the water bill. But the Pnacc, the water fund, could not spend that money, but it had to turn it into trust fund, and this trust fund that is managed in parallel should do good investments and allow that the royalties of this fund that was being accumulated permanently was used for preservation or conservation. So by the year 2000, we didn't have many actions to do. Actually, we started with just an environmental mechanism for the school. That's the only thing we had because we only had $20,000 for investment. It didn't give us anything in return. We started seeing the return 4 or 5 years later. Now the fund that we do not spend is $16 million, and then we leverage $3 million net to work every year to conserve these sources. It's still little money, but at least in this way we can work in a sustainable manner. The Pnacc project was signed for 80 years. That means we need to do things in the very long term, not just think about 2, 5, 3, 10 years. You need to think about 20, 30, 40 years for financing. Thank you very much, Malky, for your answer. Does anybody else have a question? Okay, Luis has an input. Thank you, Lorena. In this particular case, and it's quite particular, because sustainability for financial mechanism is the state, since the program is a director for the state. They should guarantee the financing mechanisms in the medium term. We have a term of 3 or 5 years to follow up the restoration process because we need to restore native forests and establish the first systems. For the moment, the national government has assigned $1.5 million through the national budget to set up in motion this in 2018, and is warranting $15 million up to 2020. So what will happen in 2020? What is not defined? This is responsibility of the national government. Now, regarding to capture external mechanisms, that's part of the program, and the technical team is working in this program, and they try to channel them and try to create some impact in restoration. So the high responsibility is for the national state. Thank you very much, Luis. Does anybody else have questions, or if any of the presenters would like to add an additional comment, I invite you to do so now. And if that's not the case, then I would like to thank again our presenters for the presentations at the time, to participate in this webinar, as well as all our participants. And to wrap up, I would like to mention that to include financial mechanisms through the water funds or national policies and the national restoration law are key tools that we can include to ensure planning related to adaptations in this current context of climate change, and mentioned that the two cases that we just saw are only two examples among the financing architecture that is being set up in different regions and countries. We have the microfinancing for adaptation. And well, that will be all. Thank you very much for your participation. And we'll be sending you in the days to come for our next webinar. If you have any questions or comments, we can share the emails from Mark and Luis and then get you in touch. And I hope you keep you can join us for the next webinars in this community. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.